Although I will say this ahead, I want to ask you to pay attention, because socialism is a bit more tiresome to explain than other ideologies, and that is because socialism is very technical. Socialism, that I'm not going to tell you anything spectacular today. There are no genocides, there is no utopia, there is no grand story about how everything is going to be okay, or some invisible hand that's going to come and make things more interesting. It's just raw politics with socialism. Having said that, welcome aboard for this lecture on social democracy and the welfare state. Some background, let's start with that, right? Last time we talked about the Nazis, and the Mafia de Poder cut my microphone and I couldn't finish the lecture. But we got to the part where I talked about how it ended, right? It ended in World War II. In World War II, these three ideologies that we saw, liberalism, communism, and Nazism, basically came together in a huge death match. And the outcome was that the Nazis got killed, eliminated, rooted, hanged, and shot from the earth. The ones that survived the war got hanged anyway in the Nuremberg trials. So they were gone, physically gone, and the rest went into hiding. The fascists went into hiding for about 40, 50 years until they would make their big comeback. The communists, they won the war, but they were wounded, right? They lost about almost 30 million people in this war. So they retreated to their side of the world in shock of all this aggression against them. And they more or less stayed there, right? They took the eastern part of Europe, they took most of Eurasia, parts of Africa, and that's it. They did not expand further into the rest of the world, with the exception of Cuba. But on this continent, for example, no communist country was able to last. There were a few attempts, but they all got crushed by United States, not economically, but directly. So the United States invaded them or killed their leaders or did something to stop this. So on our side of the world, you could not be a communist. In many countries, it was simply illegal to be a communist, right? So in the communist countries, you couldn't be a capitalist, but that goes actually both ways in the time. For example, in the United States, this was illegal. So you couldn't do that, and if you did, then they would invade you soon. So for our part of the world, right? Let's call it the West, Europe, North America, or America as a whole. You only had capitalism, right? That's the game. That's what you're allowed to do in the political spectrum. And you only had various degrees of capitalism. So the next question is much more humble than the last question. The next question is, how will we manage capitalism? Now, it's not because capitalism won on this side of the world that it solved any of its problems, right? Marx was still right on his analysis, even if his predictions didn't become true. It was still chaotic. It still had all these internal problems, and they would still continue to disrupt society. Even innocent looking things like moving people from the countryside to the city, for example, has all kind of social effects. And if we understand this, that capitalism will keep challenging society, will keep throwing rocks at it, then, well, society has to react, right? One way or the other. If it doesn't, either things will go horribly wrong, or we will go back to the old situation where either fascists grab the power or you would need a communist revolution. And if you don't want these two things, then you need to deal with this, right? You need to do something about capitalism. But what? There are two main options here. One is socialism, but I'll explain today, and the other is neoliberalism. These are the two big ideas still of today, right? They're not from this era. You have other ideologies today, but they're still the two big dogs in the house. You could kind of reduce politics to these two camps. It would not be smart to do so, but you could. And today I will explain you the first one, the older one, which is socialism. Let's see if I missed any question. No, just the wishes of a good morning to all of you. Good. So my lecture will consist of two parts. First, I'm going to explain you, as usual, the way of thinking of social democracy or democratic socialism, their principles, their values, their worldview. And then we're going to talk a bit about the welfare state. We're going to talk a bit about the plan that this comes with. Because socialism comes with a plan. It comes ready in the box, pre-packaged, with a very detailed plan of how to actually do this. This is not just a dream. This is not just an abstract ideology. This is one of, just like neoliberalism, it's a very detailed ideology. And I'm going to explain you in very summarized fashion part of that plan, right? Now, before I start, as you might have heard from gossip, I am a socialist. I do consider myself most closely to this ideology. So there's two consequences. One, you should be critical of me and fight with me and challenge me, not with things you saw in memes, but things you might have read in a book or something. A second, you could ask me anything about this. I will probably know. At least I'll be able to give you some kind of answer to this. I can do that anyway with everything I teach, but here there's a much higher chance it will be a good answer. All right. So we start with the social democratic principles. Okay. We only have 52 people, by the way. Where are these other lazy people? Scandalous. Anyway, so let's talk about the principles. Right. So today is about democratic socialism or social democracy, which are the same thing. You might have heard different words of it. In a textbook, you would probably have them defined slightly different, where social democracy is more to the right than democratic socialism, but that doesn't matter for us today. Let's just assume that they are the same thing, okay? Maybe Wikipedia says it's slightly different, but we don't care. When I talk, I'm going to talk about them as synonyms. So, and where social democracy is just how we call it in Europe, and in the rest of the world you would call it democratic socialism. But what do they have in common? What is socialism about? As I explained you earlier, the core idea of socialism is about two things. It's about shifting the power balance between the elite and the people, so giving less power and less resources for the capitalist class and more power and more resources for the working class, right? And secondly, it's about improving the human condition through common action. We're going to solve problems together in this system, and we're going to do that because a lot of ideologies are about solving problems, right? But here we're going to do that together. We're going to do it through the state, through our collective organization, which is the state. We're going to deal with things. So, for example, in healthcare, if you get sick, okay, don't worry about it. We are going to have a healthcare system that will take care of that, not you on your own figuring out what medicine you have to take, right? That is socialism. So these two things, shifting power balance towards workers and trying to improve the human condition through state action. Now, there are many types of socialists, right? This is one of the largest families in political theory. Roughly, I think you have three big variants, and they depend, first of all, on the question of how it relates to capitalism. If your type of socialism wants to transcend capitalism, wants to move beyond it, wants to move away from this damn chaotic, destructive system, right? Okay, then there are two options. Are you planning to do that via a revolution, via a total change from one day to the other? We're going to change the entire system and social relationships in it. Then you probably are a communist, right? Because you can only do that via the state, right? If you want to make this change from one day to the other. So probably you are a communist then. If you, however, want to take it more slowly, if you think we should get away from capitalism, just not tomorrow, right? But we should try to start doing things and see where that goes, start doing different things. If you have a more evolutionary path, that would lead to a more mixed economy, where you have private, state, and civil things, which then eventually could lead to communism or not. That would be kind of mixed economy socialism, as I would call it. I think I identify most with that brand, but that's not for today. However, if you think that capitalism can be saved, right? If you think, or not that you think capitalism can be saved, but if you want to reform it, if you say, okay, we're not going to abolish private property, we're just going to make it better, then you would end up with social democracy or democratic socialism. That's the topic of today, right? So we're not going towards communism, we're staying over on this side with private property and with a free market, etc., etc. So social democrats, topic of today, are socialists that accept or at least tolerate core capitalist relations in the economy. Yes, they say, okay, capitalism sucks, but getting rid of it is too difficult, is too troublesome, or just nobody wants it, so we're not going to even try, right? We're going to stay in it, but we're going to make it more social and more democratic. Get it? Democratic socialism, social democracy, more social, more democratic. That's the idea, yes. So that's what we will talk about today. Any questions on this core concept? Am I clear? Is my voice okay?
Yes.
Okay. For Miss Samantha, it is good. Then it's good for me too. And it is even good for you now. Now, let's start a bit with history so you have an understanding of what I'm talking about, because it might be a bit abstract. So let's put some faces on that, right? Where does democratic socialism come from? It comes from Europe, like most ideologies. Socialism is much older, right? Socialism was there before Marx, but they never had the power. This was just a movement, right? Socialists actually getting to power started with democracy. Sweden was one of the first countries where they won elections. But that was the exception, right? Socialists actually becoming mainstream and winning elections all over the map or influencing politics starts in the 1950s. In 1950s, 1960s, they would become one of the, if not the dominant ideology in Western Europe and the West in general. Even the United States, although they never were called socialist, because God forbid, right? They had presidents like Roosevelt, etc., which were, and Kennedy, which were close to this in what they were actually doing, right? In 1950s, tax rate in the United States was 70% on the rich. You cannot imagine that today, right? But one day it was. So in the whole West in 1950s, especially in the 1960s, democratic socialism was very popular and kind of made these countries also change their constitution, etc. Now, this model that I'm going to talk about was best realized in Scandinavia, right? So if you ask, was there actually a good example where it more or less they did everything they promised? Yes, in Norway, Sweden, Finland, these countries. You might have heard from some idiots on the internet that, oh, but these countries are not doing good because of socialism. You know, they were really capitalists and they were doing great, and then the socialist won. This is a very silly talking point in Sweden, for example, right? Socialists have won elections back to back since 1920 until today. They've been in power for 1 century in Sweden without losing once, okay? So these countries are deeply socialist. So that's the model, right? That would be your best example, but they're kind of obscure countries. Nobody knows about them. In the rest of Europe, they were also popular, although they've lost a lot of power. In the last decade, right, They lost Germany, they lost France. France used to be socialist. They lost United Kingdom. They lost, well, Belgium, less relevant, Netherlands. Lost a bunch of countries, mainly to the nationalists. Although they're still a force, they're just a lot weaker than they used to be. In Southern Europe, this is still dominant. Spain, Portugal, Italy. So in the rest of the world, right, this is normal. We think of socialism, right, of Venezuela, we think about this as something extreme or rare or isolated. It's not. Socialism is very normal ideology, just like liberalism is very normal ideology. It exists in Portugal, Spain, New Zealand, Argentina, South Korea. Even South Korea is in the far right end of this, but I would still count it. Mongolia and Mexico, right? Your president, AMLO, is a democratic socialist. He never says it, he never used the word, because he knows that all tias will lose their mind instantly, their head will explode if he would ever say that, because people don't know what socialism is. But he is. I'll get back to him later, right? Now, just to put some faces on it, let's see what you know about the world. Who's the first guy? The guy with the beard and the blue tie. First guy from the left. Anybody? Or is this too small to see? Pedro is gonna help us. Indeed, it is Lula of Brazil, socialist president, very successful one in Brazil. The person next to him, the old guy with the white hair.
Bernie.
Okay. Miss Susanna says Bernie Sanders. That is correct, right? Never got to power, but the most powerful person. Right next to him, his good friend. Who's that?
Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez.
Okay.
The senator.
Apparently you know her. Good. Then I'm not going to ask you all of them, because otherwise we will be here forever. Oh, a lot of people know her. Interesting. She's a congresswoman in the United States, one of the representatives of the United States socialism, right? Then next to her, we got Nelson Mandela, which you probably know quotes from, and that he was an important guy, but nobody ever says that he was socialist, right? Because he was, very explicitly. Lifelong member of Socialist Party. Then next to him, we have the Prime Minister of Finland, I think, which is it Denmark? I think it's Finland, which is the youngest female leader in the world. I think the youngest leader, period. So that's her. Next to her, this guy's from a different generation. This is the former president of Uruguay. He's quite popular because he, yes, Jose Mujica, indeed. Next to him, we have my man Evo Morales from Bolivia. And next to him, we have, you probably don't know, Prime Minister of Portugal. Portugal is a very left-wing country. In Portugal, literally 95% of the political spectrum is the left. So your choices between socialists, social democrats, communists, Green Party, feminists, and then you have like 5% for the PAN, which is funny because a lot of Mireas want to run away from AMLO to Portugal, not knowing that they're going straight into the mouth of the dragon. But anyway, and Mexico, right? Now this forms a spectrum. This is very important to understand. Socialism, inside of it, you still have a left and a right. For example, AMLO is on the right of this spectrum. AMLO is not a strong socialist, right? He is within this family, but barely. For example, he didn't raise taxes or none of that, which is not something Bernie Sanders would do, right? So you have AMLO on the right of this. Let's say in the middle you would have Bernie, and then on the far left end you would have somebody like Hugo Chavez. But they're all socialists, right? I'm going to use Mexico a lot as an example because you know Mexico, right? But you have to understand that this is the right wing of the spectrum, right? AMLO is a very soft socialist in comparison to the rest on this list. So it's a weak case, but it's a case that you are most familiar with. It's barely socialism. All right, what's the general worldview of socialism, right? Is it we should it resolves around problems, which is very important because something you often hear from your Theo at the Carne Asada is that socialism is unrealistic, right? It's utopic, it's a dream. No, it's the exact opposite of that. Socialism is anti-utopic. It assumes that things will go wrong. Socialism is built from the ground up on the assumption that life sucks and that capitalism will mess up. It's based on the expectation of problems, not on the expectation of utopia, the expectation of problems. Because it starts from the same Marxist idea, right, that capitalism is inherently problematic. It starts from the same analysis, right? You have these classes fighting each other, you have economical crisis that's going to happen, you have all these problems. And all these problems constantly generate new challenges. It generates new problems, it pokes society all the time, and society has to react, right? Or bad things will happen. Now, the difference is that socialism, it doesn't start from the idea that people are good in a naive sense, in like, oh, people are naturally going to work together or something. That's not an assumption of socialism. Socialism thinks people are good in the wordy sense, as if people are worth it. People are naturally social. They can work together. They're not necessarily going to, but they can. And we could help them. We could make a society that's better for them. And since people are worthy, since they have an inherent worth, right? Fascists don't believe this, but it's kind of humanist logic that people deserve protection. And they deserve protection here and now, not in the future. Socialism is not about in 200 years we're going to solve this or that. No, no, no. Today, today. Baby needs milk today, not tomorrow, today. So socialism is about trying to deal with problems of people in a very present sense, right? It's about managing the problems of capitalism through the state intervention. So it's built from the ground up again on the idea that things are gonna mess up. It is not utopic in that sense. Socialism also doesn't try to create a perfect world. It doesn't think that is possible. It just thinks that problems happen and you need to deal with them, right? That's the basic intuition of this. So in practice, it takes the form of all kind of policies that try to directly impact events or prevent them. Again, socialism is not about indirect impact. If we want, well, I'll give the example soon in more detail, but if you wanted more trees, then the socialist policy is to plant more trees, right? Not to cut taxes on trees so that maybe we get some Chinese investor that will plant a lot of trees. No, we're gonna do it directly, right? If you want workers to have more wage, well, then you're going to raise the minimum wage, not, I don't know, some kind of attract American companies so they would pay higher. No, you just raise the minimum wage and the people have more wage, right? It's very direct in what it does, or preventive. So it doesn't rely on, there's no big story in socialism. That's also its weakness. I don't have any romantic, great utopic vision to tell you about how we're going to reach a perfect society, right? Either by natural selection or through the market reaching a perfect balance, or to, I don't know what, to communism coming to us. There is no such thing. There is no utopic end goal in socialism. There's just dealing with incoming problems, because it assumes that the world is unstable. Because we chose capitalism in this ideology knowing that it's bad. Right, you stay in this knowing that it's problematic, so you expect problems. So socialism, contrary to what you might have heard, is, I would say, is a very realist way of thinking about policies. It's about striving for very predictable results. socialist policies have predictable effects. As in, I can explain you exactly why this effect is going to happen. There's no magic, there's no invisible hand, there's none of this, no metaphysics, not God blessing us, none of this. All right, it's a scientist's ideology, you could call it. Also, to go a bit further, right, it's not all Marx. We saw this from a Marxist point of view, right? But Marx and his political economy, but you can also look at it from a more macroeconomical point of view, right? So the core principles of the economic assumptions of democratic socialism are: one, that the economy, thus capitalism, is there to serve the people, not for itself, right? We accept capitalism because we don't bother to change it, I guess, in this ideology. Because, yes, we do that, but we don't do it because we agree with the goal of capitalism itself, right? Life should not be about making ever more money for other people. Capitalism should be like an addition to society. Society shouldn't be about it, right? Economy must serve the people. If it doesn't, it is useless. If you have a company that doesn't employ anyone or that doesn't employ people well, we could as well not have had it. Because the goal is not just to make more money for someone. That is seen as pathological. It's a kind of weird addiction people have. And second, capitalism will not naturally reach this condition. Capitalism does not naturally serve the interests of the people, right? That's a core socialist assumption. And if it doesn't naturally do it, then we need to strong arm it into doing so. For this, socialism takes a lot of inspiration from Marx, but also from very different thinkers, economists. One of them is Mr. Keynes. You're going to see Keynes in the future in macroeconomy or in history of economical thought. Important to mention that Keynes is not a socialist. He's a liberal, very explicitly, because he's part of the Liberal Party. But still, he's a social liberal. And socialists kind of took his ideas and made them their own. This shows you nicely how some ideologies influence each other. So what does Keynes say? Keynes is a capitalist. But Keynes is a very realistic capitalist. He says, look, as far as I know, and in any country I've ever seen, capitalism did not reach an equilibrium, this did not reach a non-crisis state in which everything was good. It will never, and I'm not saying it will never, but I've never seen, and that's true still today, capitalism reach full employment. Communism did. East Germany had zero unemployment at some point. West Germany never did, right? West Germany was capitalist, East Germany was communist. So it never reached full employment and never reached full welfare. It's theoretically possible. I've just never seen it, right? Now, since it is theoretically possible, right, that there's a chance that capitalism ends up well. And that chance is 5%. It has this nice bell curve with like the cutoff point that's outside the statistical variation. So yeah, there's a chance that all things will go well. And we could wait for that. We could wait till the market naturally 1 year lands perfectly. Problem is, statistically speaking, we will probably be dead by then. He's very a sober guy, he says, right? So we could wait till into the long run, the market maybe naturally it's a good balance, but in the long run, we are all dead. So since I don't want to wait for this, and since I know no country where this has happened, and it's still true today, let's not wait around, right? Let's try to poke this system. Let's try to interact with it. Let's not just wait for it naturally to sort itself out, because it's probably not going to happen. Instead, the state should invest. The state should take initiative. It should invest. It should create jobs directly when the system is not creating jobs. And it should always try to keep wages high, right? When the economy is down, you should do big projects like a train Maya, which is supposed to generate 1 million jobs according to the UN. And at all times, you should try to keep raising the wage to keep demand going, therefore to stimulate the economy, right? You shouldn't just let it be. It's Keynes. Socialists also like this way of thinking, right? So that's the general worldview of how they see capitalism. Now let's get into what they actually want, right? What are the values, what are the principles of social democracy, of democratic socialism? Now the word social democracy consists of two words, social and democracy, and they're both very indicative of what this is, right? So let's start with the social part in the word social democracy or democratic socialism. Doesn't matter how you write it. Social, how are they social, right? Well, in two main ways. The first one is social as in social justice. The idea that there must be justice and the idea that the system doesn't naturally generate this justice, right? The core idea of this is that the government should protect people from the effects of capitalism, from poverty, from inequality, from alienation, from all the bad things that comes with this, from early death. That is justice, right? Protecting people, giving people what they deserve. Now, how does that take shape? One way in which it takes shape, right, is that yes, we accept capitalism. We temporarily tolerate it as part of the core of the economy. We also have a big public sector, right? And maybe, depending on which socialist it is, let's say something like Hugo Chavez, it's temporary because we do want to get out of the system, ideally one day. So we temporarily tolerate it as part of the economy. But we will try to redistribute the wealth, right? So we're going to accept that people are going to go to work for some other person, but the money that's being made here, we're going to try to get it back, right? We're going to try to redistribute the outcomes of capitalism. So we don't change what happens at the start of the day. You get up, you work for someone else, but we will try to change what happens at the end of the day, right? The part where you get paid. That's what we will try to change. That is justice. Justice is redistribution. It's making sure that the outcomes of this dance are equitable. In short, what does that mean? It means that you tax the rich. It means that you tax or that you increase taxes on the wealthy, on wealthy people, on the companies, etc. And you're going to use that money to spend on the middle class and the working class and the poor, right? You're going to use the money of the rich to spend on everybody else and thereby redistribute and make things better. Now, you might think, oh, raise taxes, that's bad. But that's because you don't see it from the socialist perspective. Or maybe you still think it's bad if you see it from the socialist perspective. But let me explain the perspective, right? We have to look at this from a Marxist sense. Taxing, from a Marxist sense, is actually good for you, right? Taxing means gaining money back that is taken from you in the first place. So let's go back to my good old pizza example, right? You work all day, you sell pizzas, you earn money. Let's say you earn 400. Oh, my son is getting really angry on the background. You earn 400. At the end of the month, your boss gives you back 100 of that, pockets 300, right? Average rate of exploitation. So if the government now takes 100 from that remaining 300 and spends that on paying for the school of your children, right? You gain money back. So taxes, in this sense, is taking the money that the capitalist has first extracted from the worker and trying to grab some of that and bring it back into the community, right? That's taxes from a socialist perspective, what it actually does. You think of it as losing money, but actually the community is gaining money, yes, if you want to see it from this perspective. It is not true that if you wouldn't tax, that your wages would go up. At least that's not an empirical fact. In many tax cuts, they promise that would happen. It usually doesn't, or it happens with like 1% raise on a 20% tax cut. So that's the idea of it, right? You take some of the money that the capitalists extract from the working class and you use it for the common good. Now, when there's not enough money, you would at least give preferences to the poor. Can you hear my son scream in the background? He's quite advocate about being
A
heard.
little bit.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
Okay, Astrid makes a good comment. Okay, so that's redistribution, right? Redistribution as justice. I hope you get this logic here. And that's very central to socialism, that it tries to solve problems by redistributing the outcomes. Not how it actually works, because that you would need communism, but you try to solve the problem at the end of the day, not at the beginning of the day. The other thing that socialism tries to do in terms of social justice, right, is to strive for equality. Not communist equality, but relative equality, right? It tries to get the classes closer together, mainly by bringing the bottom ones up. So that would mean in practice raising wages, right? As AMLO has done already twice. With the effect that the disposable income of Mexicans, on average, raised by 6% under him. Because you try to do that, you do it in the most straightforward way, again, not attracting companies from here or there. You just raise the wages and then wages go up miraculously. Who would have thought? That's socialism, but it's equality in a broader sense. It's not just equality between rich and poor, right? Which you won't achieve. You just try to have less poor. It's also about equality between genders, for example. Not that socialism is explicitly feminist, because feminists would object to that idea, but compared to other ideologies, it is the closest one to this, right? At least tries to take this into account. And also equality between other groups, right? Socialism is typically there to defend the weak. And the weak could be not just the poor, it could also be, for example, national minorities, indigenous people. It could be migrants. We saw with fascism that a lot of ideologies hate on migrants. There's nothing socialist about migrants, it's just that they typically come in at the bottom. They typically come in a very weak position, and socialism is a naturally caring ideology, so it will typically take the side of migrants, if only because nobody else does, to try to integrate them and therefore create equality between strangers and people who are already there, right? So that's kind of the idea here, a broader concept of equality. Okay. So you can start to see the difference, I hope, between socialism and communism, right? As the Frena poster here says, it's an important difference to understand. Okay. Now you can also see here that AMLO is kind of only half a socialist, right? Because he didn't raise taxes, which real socialists, it makes them very nervous. I'll get back to that at the end. He is barely a socialist, but he is a socialist in the following way, not necessarily in the redistributive way, but definitely in the caring way, right? Social, the social part of socialism or social democracy also means social and as in the friendly, let me help you way, right? Socialism, if you would have to give it like a group charisma or like a vibe, it is more maternal than it is paternal in its energy, right? Socialist leaders are rarely the super macho people. They have more a grandmotherly aura to them. And it's because social democracy is all about caring policies. It's the idea that people are naturally social, not necessarily good, but social, and that we should be in solidarity with each other, that we're in this together. That, as my mom would say, we are here on earth to help each other, right? That's kind of your mission on earth, to help other people. And thus, as a nation, we should help each other. The state should help the citizens and protect them from things that could go wrong in their life, from individual misfortune. In socialism, it's not everybody for their own, right? It's about helping each other and the state helping you deal with problems that will happen, because socialism, again, is not naive. It assumes that capitalism will generate problems, and also people are going to fuck up. It assumes that will happen, doesn't think people are perfect. but it tries to protect them from that. And it does that via a whole massive set of policies that we call the welfare state. And I always want to give a lecture on just that, but we don't have time for that. I will discuss it in very not in abstract, but in few detail later. We'll talk about what the welfare state is and how they actually achieve this. But there is a plan, a very big plan. This is not abstract. What's important for now, right, is that in democratic socialism, the government takes responsibility for social outcomes. If things go massively wrong, yes, it is the people's fault at some point, but even if that's true, you still need to deal with that, right? Let's say we have a very bad view of human nature. Let's say you think, oh, people are violent and lazy. Okay, but what are you going to do about that? The socialist would ask, right? You can say that, and conservatives say this all the time. Okay, now what? Just going to scold them and then leave? No, if you actually believe that, you need to interact with people and try to change that, right? So the state takes responsibility for things. In liberalism, it doesn't, right? In liberalism, even in social liberalism, it's about creating a fair chance, right? Everybody has a chance of not being poor. Right? It's perfectly possible to have a society where everybody has a chance to get out of poverty and have 70% poverty at the same time, right? Because this chance is not working out for everyone, but they do have it in theory. It's not acceptable to socialism. Socialism is about outcomes, right? You want to reduce poverty, not just have a chance of reducing poverty, right? You want it to actually happen. So the state here takes this responsibility for improving things, even if it's not the government's fault. Even if it's the individual's fault, they'll still try to at least get that person on the right path, right? And it comes with a focus on investing in people, right? Socialism has a focus on human capital. AMLO has said this 1,000 times that, let me see in my bad Spanish, la verdad riqueza del país es el pueblo, or that the wealth of a nation is in its people, right? And its culture. Well, socialists believe this, very socialist thing of him to say. The idea is that, okay, if you're going to invest in something, the best thing you could invest in is in making your population stronger, right? Rather than infrastructure, rather than attracting investment, the best thing you could put money in is in getting people more high skilled, more healthy, more engaged with things. You're going to do that just via education. You're going to invest in that via healthcare, etc. But the logic here is inclusion. Because a lot of ideologies invest, fascism also invests in education and healthcare, especially in healthcare, not so much education. But unlike fascism, which is exclusive based, this is inclusive. You try to include everyone in this. It's for the population as a whole. Let me give you an example that shows you the difference in ways of thinking, right? Again, I'm going to use Mexico as an example because you know Mexico. Not that Mexico is a good example, right? Mexico is a weak socialist country. I should be talking about Sweden, but you don't know Sweden. Let's talk about education. Let's talk about the 40s perspective in education, right? What the fourth transformation is not doing, what AMLO is not doing, is investing a lot more in higher education. Okay, he's building some universities, but I think they actually cut money on things like funding for PhDs, on things like money for internships of master students, like to go abroad and set. They're not investing in high-end education. They're not investing in masters and PhDs and that type of level. And that make you think, oh, they're not about education, but that's because you don't understand the socialist logic. What they're trying to do is to get people to university in the first place, right? They're trying to raise education from the bottom up. Almost all their money is going into primary education and secondary education. That's where they're actually pumping a lot of resources into, not into what I'm doing. Why? Because the logic is, if you want to have more master graduates, it's better to get more people into university in the first place than to pay for more masters, right? Because in Mexico, we are one of the countries with the lowest amount of people with higher education, right? Over half of people does not finish high school. I think it's 63%, don't quote me on it, don't finish high school. That is dramatic, right? Now, why don't they finish high school? In a lot of cases, because they start working, right? With poor people in general, they cannot afford to have their kids go to 18 when they could already work since 14, right? As soon as they're of age that they could work. It's better for the family if they go work so they can, have breakfast. So if you want to get more people to university, they need to finish high school first. So the logic is we're going to sponsor people to finish school. That's exactly what the government does. That is the Becas Benito Juarez, as you can see a picture here. What it does, it's a conditional cash transfer. This is a very well-tested idea that exists all over Latin America. We're one of the last countries to do it. Here's the idea. You want to give more money to poor people, but you also want them to help themselves and get out of poverty. So what you're going to do, you're going to give the money on the condition. My son stole my car keys. This is not good. You're going to give the money on the condition that they're going to send their kids to school, right? That's what the government is doing. If you send your kids to school, okay, you're going to receive money. They drop out of school, you don't get money. This pays for, I think, 9 million people. This is very big, right? This will, I predict these things, this will lead to a massive increase of people entering university in 3 years. Because so many millions more people are going to graduate from high school, right? So the idea is you try to increase education from the bottom up, not from the top down. You don't start with master, with primary school, right? That's a socialist logic. You might agree or not agree with it, but you have to understand it before you judge it, right? That's all I ask of you. So it is about creating fair chances and outcomes for people. It's about empowering people. I'm going to give a much longer example if I have time left at the end. Remind me of that. I want to talk about Sembrado Vida. So that's the idea, right? You invest in people, preferably the weakest first, because you want to not just have the best people. Fascism also wants to have the best people. Liberalism also wants to have the best people. You want to get everybody to become better, starting at the bottom. So that's the social aspect of democratic socialism. Now let's talk about the democratic aspect, right? What does that mean? Well, the democratic socialists are democratic in the sense that they want to win elections. That is true. I don't know of any democratic socialist dictatorships, but well, maybe I don't count Venezuela as a dictatorship, but that would be like the closest you would get, maybe. Anyway, they're Democrats, they're for elections, but that's not special, right? So are liberals, even some fascists, so are neoliberals, they're all for democracy. What makes social democrats Democrat, right? What it's about? Well, I have to look again at the meaning of the word Democrat. The power to the people, right? The rule of the people. Okay, what does that mean? Elections, okay. But what are we actually ruling over? That's another question, right? Okay, the people have the power, but the power over what? What do we get to decide in a democracy? It's a very important question, right? Socialism or democratic power or rule as a people should also include the economy. So in a liberal point of view, people also get to choose, but they don't get to choose about a lot of things. In a perfect neoliberal world, people get to choose about things like abortion, right? That's what we can fight about. Or the legal age at which you could have sex, or things like that. But you would not get to choose about in what direction the economy should develop, or about wages, or about social security. Those things should be left to experts, or preferably nobody at all in a liberal framework, right? You shouldn't make any decisions about that. You have to fight each other about cultural stuff. That's what democracy means in a liberal point of view, not in a socialist point of view. In a socialist point of view, the idea is that you use democracy in a broad sense, not just voting, but also participation processes, transparency, local level stuff, that you use that to influence the economy. Yes, you try to get a grip of your bigger context. Because you're an individual, you're in capitalism, you have no power, right? You only have power over yourself. You can sell your labor, that's it. But you're still going to try to get a grip of this bigger machine via democracy. So social democracy widens the scope of politics, right? They're as democratic as liberals, except that they think that the people should have power over more things, right? Democracy the state should have a wider reach. There should be more things you can make a vote on than in other ideologies, because the state can intervene in the economy. And by doing so, by using democracy to get a grip of how the economy works, they will try to resist the power of the elite, right? The elite dominates you in your daily life because they're the boss and you work for them. But in the civil life, with your vote, you're going to try to get back at them, right? You're going to say, oh, you like outsourcing? Well, I'm going to vote for these guys, and these guys are going to ban outsourcing. And now you have to give me a real contract, right? And that's what's actually happening right now. So people are going to use their vote to try to influence the economy that they in person cannot do. That's what makes social democrats Democrats, because they want the people to have more power. Not just choice, but actual power. And that will lead to regulation, right? The idea that, okay, we have capitalism, but capitalism is going to function according to the rules that the people set, right? Supply and demand might lead to lower wages, so we're not going to have that. We're going to have a minimum wage. So the state is going to set the rules on how private enterprise can work. But there will be private enterprise. It's not going to own the private enterprise. That's the Marxist route. That's the communist route, right? It doesn't come with ownership. It comes with regulation in socialism, which is a different logic, right? You go be against that. You could say, yeah, that's kind of weak. It's better to own the companies, right? It's better if the people actually have the means of production. Then they'll get things done. Okay, but that's a different system. That's a different world. That's not democratic socialism. The other thing that's democratic about it, that is about the people's power, is if they're successful, are going to base themselves in civil society. They're going to have their foundation organized people in mass movements, right? And in a populist variant, in La Raza in general, right, it's just bringing masses of people, mobilizing masses of people. Think of Bernie Sanders and his big rallies. Think of AMLO when he goes out and 100,000 of people try to swarm him. That's what you want to do if you're successful. And socialism can actually do this. Socialism and fascism are the two ideologies that are best at being populist, at whipping people. Whipping as in getting them to do things, right? At mobilizing the force, visibly mobilizing the force of their electorate by physically bringing them out of the streets. Liberals almost never achieve this. They at best get a few thousand people who probably work for them, right? Why? Because social democrats typically don't have money. They're not backed by the industry. So, well, they need to do it another way, right? If you don't have money, you need numbers. So they'll try to make alliances with civil society, preferably with trade unions, with syndicates. Typically, in most countries, you have an alliance between the democratic socialists and the syndicates. If you don't have that, socialists are very weak. They're probably not going to get to power. Because syndicates are organized labor, they're a big civil organization, they have political power. Sometimes they are literally the same thing in some countries. For example, in Belgium, the Social Democrats and the Socialist Union are kind of the same organization, that they're very tied to each other, right? Sometimes, like in Mexico, they're not the same thing, and your socialists just have to kind of shop around and try to buy the loyalty of these different syndicates. But that's what you want to do, right? And thus you're going to promote syndicate-like things. You're going to promote collective bargaining. You're going to promote agreements. You're going to involve the syndicates in policy making, right? If you're going to have a new debate on something, let's say you want to reform education, you're going to invite the teacher syndicate to that negotiation. And you're going to support their protests, etc., etc., etc. So socialists, since they don't have money, they're going to try to use manpower. They're going to organize mass protests to get things done, right? Whether they're in power or out of power, that's what you're going to use to put pressure. And if you cannot do that, you probably fail as a socialist party. You will be a party that only intellectuals vote on and you get 10% or something, but you won't get things done. You need this popular base to be successful. At least that's my opinion. I'm pro-populist type of guy. There's people who disagree with that. You also have a more intellectual route towards socialism where you just try to convince people through writing columns. I don't really believe that, although I write columns. So that's the democratic side, right? And I said it's about using democracy to get power, right? To shift this power balance. Another way in which this will be done is by controlling the public sector. Well, you always control the public sector by having a large public sector, right? This depends a bit on what type of socialism it is. But on the more left side of the spectrum, right? In strong cases, the government will actually try to control and own big parts of the economy. Not all, it's not communism, but it will try to control key economic sectors, things that you need to survive, right? Things that we actually need. Socialists will try to have them nationalized for two reasons, right? So what they're talking about sectors like the energy sector. So you can be sure that this stays on, right? Banking sector, water, education, healthcare, public transport, and many other things, right? Telecommunication, maybe, inshallah, these type of things. For two reasons. First reason is to just have control over how it's done, right? To get democratic control on over how this sector works. To make sure that, you know, the bus comes to your neighborhood, to make sure that there is accessible education, but also to set the policies, right? To, for example, control how banking works, to make sure that banks are not going to use all of your money to invest in risky things. And then if that goes wrong, then they lose your money, right? To try to regulate those things. So you want to keep the control over these key things like education and water within the country. Often, if that doesn't happen, you get things like this. Liberals will say, oh, we should liberate this sector, right? Let's say it's oil. We should give it back to the people, right? The state shouldn't have this. We should have, you know, people owning this. That's better. So you put it for sale, and then Saudi Arabia comes, and now they own it. Did things get more democratic? You know, now just another country owns your resources. Socialists don't want to let that happen, right? They want to keep the control at a minimum within your country. Because if you liberalize it, typically the investors won't be from your country, right? The Americans will come take our stuff. Now we have to pay our bills to them. You don't want that, at least not in a socialist point of view. And also because if the government owns these things, it can decide the price, right? It can decide how much the bus costs. In Leon, the bus is not socialized. The bus is a private company. It just has a contract with the state, and that means that, well, things are quite expensive, even if they're subsidized. Or you can control the service, right? You can now dictate what they should do and who they should help to make sure you get the service that you want. That's most equitable, that's most fair, that's most just. That's one reason why you want to do this, right? To make sure it doesn't go wrong. And B, well, to build on that, B is to anticipate market failure. Markets are imperfect things. Markets can work out, and they typically work in situations where you're talking about products that you don't actually need or that are not vital. For example, perfume, right? If you have perfume, okay, you have different brands. It's easy to have competition because you compete on both price and smell and image, right? Okay, so they can offer you different options and there's something for everyone. And if I don't like it, well, I can just not buy perfume. For example, right now, I'm not wearing that. But that's very different if we talk about things that you actually need, right? For example, healthcare. In healthcare, we're not really in a market situation, right? If I'm dying, I'm not going to argue with the doctor. I'm not going to be like, oh, but can I get a 20% discount, or I'm going to go to the other one, right? When I'm in the emergency room, you you have to take it. You cannot not buy healthcare. Then you die. Well, you could do it, but then you die. So you have systems like United States, where if you break your arm, you will be paying for that the rest of your life. That's a clear situation of market failure, right? So markets don't automatically generate desirable outcomes. There are a lot of examples of sectors where they usually fuck up. Banks, public transport, for example. If you live in a village where the bus could come to, it would be profitable for the bus to come pick you up, right? Doesn't mean that the bus is going to come, because it could be more profitable for the bus to just stay on its route and do it 2 times, right? It could make money of picking you up, but it can make more money by driving the same route twice in that time. So it's never going to come, right? Only if you tell the bus where to go, you can make sure it's going to pick up everyone. Because the path of most money just leads through the most densely populated neighborhoods. So in regions where you don't have regulated public transport, buses are slow because they don't come for you. All right. So you try to anticipate this, you try to intervene in these markets, make it done right. Let me take a break to breathe. Now let's talk about the welfare state. By the way, you can interrupt me, right? You can type things in the chat. As I said, socialism, these are the principles. This is how they think, this is what they want. Now there is a standard plan of doing this. You have innovations, you have new things. We do new things in Mexico. But socialism kind of comes with an out-of-the-box set of policies that have been tested, that are old policies, they work. And it's called the welfare state. I wish I could have a whole lecture to explain this, because I know a lot about this. I'm a welfare state sociologist. But let's do it quickly. Right? What's the welfare state? The welfare state is, let me read this quote for you, going to Garland. The welfare state is a government of the economy and the population in the interest of security, stability, and welfare, utilizing the tools of insurance, economic management, and comprehensive social provision, together with the taxes, legal regulations, and forms of expertise required for their operation. The welfare state is a way of organizing the state that originated in Europe and the West in 1950s and 60s. The idea of this is a socialist idea, but this is not limited to socialism. This is one of these ideas that starts in one ideology and then the others take it over, right? Just like freedom of religion is a liberal idea, but then the other ideologies also took it. Same as with the welfare state. Liberals, conservatives, Roosevelt, for example, have all supported this idea. The PRI did this at some point of a welfare state, which, by the way, is not a state. It's a bit misleading name. It's a state, but it's also companies, NGOs, volunteers. It involves a lot of different actors. Now, the welfare state, which I really had more time, wish I had more time to talk about, has 5 components. The 5th one is regulation. We already talked about that, so we're not going to talk about that again. There are 4 remaining components, and I'm going to explain them to you in general, from a bird's eye view, right? I can explain you everything in more detail, but we ain't got time for that. 4 components, dear students of the welfare state. Please pay attention. This is important for you to learn things. Number 1 is social insurance. Social insurance, what's insurance, right? Insurance, like your car insurance, is when you pay into a pot, and when something bad happens, the thing you are insured against, when that happens, you're going to get compensated for that, right? You have insurance against crashing your car, you pay for it. When you crash your car, you get the money. Now we're going to apply that same principle to society, to things that are going to happen to you in life. Yeah? Things that will happen to you, not your stuff. That's called a social insurance. So social insurance programs are, and I quote this from Garland, comprehensive compulsory schemes designed to protect workers and their families against the risk of lost earnings due to injury, sickness, the IMSS is social insurance, old age, pensions, disability or unemployment. So this is about pensions, this is about healthcare, is about unemployment insurance, which we don't have in Mexico, right? But that is a socialist thing to do. It's about these things. It protects you against things that will go wrong on the labor market, from having to retire to you breaking your leg to your company moving to Vietnam, right? It's about protecting you against it. Very important is the word protect. This doesn't help you, it protects you, right? Social insurance does not get you out of poverty. It protects you from where you are. It's about stopping you from falling you are. It's not about lifting you up, right? It protects your current position. What's important to understand here is that social insurance, social security, you pay taxes to it, right? And it seems like you're paying taxes for other people, but that's not really how it works. It is not redistribution from rich to poor. It is distribution from you and your community over time. It's distribution across the life course. It's from you to your children. It's from you to old you when you retire, right? Most of the money you spend on social insurance comes back to you or your children or your parents, right? It's a redistribution across time rather than across classes. Although it works a little bit like that, because the rich pay a bit more, and they typically use this less. But in general, this is about the middle class helping the middle class, not the middle class helping the poor. The middle class helping the poor is the second thing. That's social assistance. So social insurance and social assistance are different things. Insurance is about protecting, assistance is about helping, right? That's what the words mean. Social assistance is non-contributory. It doesn't come from you paying in your own account. Non-contributory income support systems that save anyone who falls outside the system of social insurance or whose income is insufficient for his or her basic needs. Social assistance is about helping people who cannot help themselves. People that are born with Down syndrome, for example, are people who, for whatever reason, are in real big trouble, right? Single mothers that are poor, right? They need some help. So social assistance is about helping them. It's about helping those who need help or who cannot help themselves. Via cash transfers, you give them money. For example, we have a program that helps working mothers in Mexico, and that's one of these things. Now, this can come in two ways. It could either be universal, that means that everybody gets it. An example of that is AMLO's universal pension, right? All old people, and if your grandmother doesn't have it, you should tell her to get it. All old people, whether they work or not, have worked or not, will receive money from the government now. Not a lot, but enough to buy tortillas. That's universal, everybody gets it, right? You could also have this with child support. But usually that's not the case. 80% of social assistance is not universal. It is what is called means tested. What the hell does that mean? It means that you have to prove that you need it. They will test your means. If you have money, they're not going to give you money, right? So you have to prove basically that you're poor. You have to prove that you need help. So the help will only go to the people who need it. That's the majority of social assistance. So again, social assistance, giving money to people who need it. Social insurance, giving money in case things go wrong, right, to you. First is a middle class program. The other one is more a lower class oriented logic. This is about money. Welfare state is not just about money. It's also come in two kinds. So the third element are publicly funded social services. This is what we already talked about in this class and passed a bit with communism, right? It's about the state giving people access to key goods in society to make sure that everybody could get them. Things like education, things like your university, right, is subsidized. This is a socialist idea, right, to make sure that people can get it. But also things like job training, healthcare, right, public hospitals, not the insurance part of it, but the actual facility, right? Um, so the things, not that what the IMS does, but what Secretariat de Salud does. Public transport, daytime childcare, very important. You're too young to understand this. Childcare is very important. Legal help, and my favorite, social housing. What's social housing? Social housing, in short, is when the government builds houses, typically apartments, and it's not communism. It's not going to give them to people, but it's going to rent them for cheap to people in a controlled way. So you will only be paying whatever you earn 20% of your income, right? So why can the government do this? Why can it rent it cheap to people? Because the government doesn't die, right? The government can get its investment back in 80 years' time. A physical person wants to make their money back while they're alive, right? So they're not going to rent their stuff for cheap. But if you don't need to worry about that, if you can plan 100 years ahead, which the state can do, you can rent people very cheaply. And that is super important. It's probably the second most important thing you can do to reduce poverty. First one is raise wages. Second one is probably social housing. We don't have this in Mexico, by the way. Get AMLO on the phone. I need to talk to him about this. So social services are probably the least stigmatizing part of the welfare state, because it opens up services that everybody can use, right? Everybody can go to public universities. Some of your parents will come from a humble background. Some of your parents will actually be upper middle class or even upper class and just made the choice that this is better, that they're not going to spend hundred thousands of pesos each semester on things. And both of you can come together and enjoy this education, right? Which still has a relatively good reputation compared to many other places. That's the social services part. And then we have a last part that you probably never heard about, which is personalized social services. This is about helping people in the most direct sense of the word help, as in, let me help you with that. Not as in, let me give you money, but as in, I'm going to help you, physically help you. Like I help you to move your stuff if you're moving, that type of help, right? Why? Because the world is a confusing place, right? Society is very hard and confusing and complex. And for some people, it is too complex, right? And socialism intends to help you in those moments. So these are things like social work, helping people fill in paperwork, right? Let's say your boss harassed you at the job and you want to file a case against them, but you have no clue where to start, right? Social work is about helping you fill in that paperwork, helping you understand your bills. Because a lot of people don't. Right? A lot of people can't even read, leave alone read complex things. Read a court letter, or if they come to court, I don't know what it is. That's social work, helping people with those things. Helping people as parents. Not all people are naturally good at being parents. And if you're liberal, you'd be like, yeah, the poor or bad parents. Ha ha ha. Okay, but what are you going to do about it, right? It's about assisting people in this. It's about assisting elderly people, going once a week to their house, cooking for them, helping them get on the bus in their wheelchair, right? This type of helping people by actually physically helping them. Those types of services, community care, probation, all these things fall under personalized social services. What's important here is that there's a combination of caring and disciplining, right? If you think that people are living their life wrong, okay, you can say that, you can laugh at them, but what are you going to do about it, right? With personalized social services, you insert social workers into their life. If people have their kids in cages and feed them dog food, well, again, instead of making jokes, well, you're probably going to intervene in that. If you have a person of the government in their life, you're going to be like, oh, these people keep their kids in cages. let's take their kids, or let's explain them they really have to change that, right? It's also about correcting problematic families, not just helping them, right? It's a two-way street. There's a bit of disciplining in this too, which can have negative effects, but just so you understand. So 4 things: social insurance, social assistance, public social services, and personalized social services, all of which are very important. This is the tip of the iceberg, right? But that's the welfare state. Now let's get to an important question that you've all asked. So far, by the way, students, what I've just explained to you, the welfare state, sounds quite good, right? What do you think? Does this sound nice?
Yes, it does.
One person is awake. Okay. But you say, yeah, but teacher, this all sounds nice, right? But does it actually work? Astrid says, sounds unrealistic. Right, okay. So does it work? Is it not all just a dream, teacher? Right? Well, you can predict what my answer is going to be to this. I'm going to say yes. Partly because I would say that to most ideologies, right? I think all major ideologies work. You don't become a force in world politics by just writing something on a napkin and then it fails if you try it, right? Liberalism works, neoliberalism works, fascism works, communism works, and the socialism also works. But here the case is a bit stronger. Sounds good in theory, Javier says. Well, does it work? Claro que sí, it works. This has been applied in so many countries all over the world, almost always successfully. Very simple evidence of this is that if you look at the index of human development, most of the countries in the top 10 are socialist countries, including the #1 spot, which is Norway. Given Norway today is a conservative government, but historically, last 90 years, has been socialist. So I think that's an important thing to mention, right? That the literal best country on earth is a socialist one. And so is most of the top 20. So it definitely works, because I can point at real life existing today countries that are doing very good with this. Probably highest levels of human civilization we've reached have been under the system. But you say, yes, but teacher, no. Those are white people, right? And white people are better than us. We learned this from the Nazis. We Latinos, we cannot do this. You know, this works in Europe. It doesn't work here, teacher. Because look at Venezuela, right? Venezuela, it's so bad. That's what socialism means in our side of the world. Okay, let's talk about that. So Venezuela, is Venezuela a socialist country? Yes, it is. Some socialists will try to deal with this question by denying it. I think that's childish. Venezuela is ruled by a socialist party, a very corrupt socialist party, but Hugo Chavez was a socialist, so is Maduro. And it did go wrong. I'm not denying that. Mainly went wrong because their economy is 91% dependent on oil, and the price of oil was cut by half, so their GDP got cut in half. No system survives that. But let's forget that. Let's say it was their fault. Let's say it was socialism, although that's not true, but let's say it was, right? The problem with the idea that it's not possible because of Venezuela is that you only associate socialism with Venezuela, while about half the countries use this system, even in Latin America. Let me show you something. Around the time Hugo Chavez was alive, most countries in South America had a socialist government, but we never talk about that. And they did very well. Here are poverty rates. These are underestimations to my expertise. You should think of every number as 10% higher. Between 2005 and 2012, this was Latin Americans' red wave. Most countries in the South were socialist at this point, between these 2 years. Let's look at poverty rates. Argentina started in 24, ended in 4.3% poverty after socialism. Bolivia, 63%, ended in 36. Well, socialism kept going there till today. Brazil, from 36 to 18. Chile from 13 to Ecuador from 48 to 35, and Uruguay from 18 to 6. I put Mexico up there. We had Calderon during this time. Our poverty went up at the same time as some of these countries like Bolivia cut their poverty in half, right? By the way, Venezuela also cut their poverty in half in the same time. This is right before the crisis, right? So it works in Latin America, right? With very hard numbers. This is not, if any Mexican president would do this, you would have statues of him on every square, right? Cutting poverty in half, can you imagine that? In 7 years, it happened. Now you'd say, yeah, but teacher, okay, I can see these facts, but I want to see them, but teacher, it ruined their economy, didn't it? I mean, that's what happens with socialism. And not really. Let me show you 2 examples here. Astrid said, just because a party is socialist name doesn't make it socialist automatically. That is true, although I will contend that Venezuela did try these things. But 2 examples here. This is Brazil. Brazil GDP, not from leftist.org, but from the World Bank, is this data. You see the red marks? This is when Lula got to power. So Lula gets to power, the first red mark. Then we have the highest economical growth in the world ever, Brazil under Lula, ever, times 5 the economy grew. Then he loses power. Then you get this follow-up, Rousseff, not so good, but no crisis. Then she goes out of power, the whole thing tanks. This happened under socialists, right? Another example, Bolivia. Latin country, not white people, not Scandinavia, good old Latinos. This is under Evo Morales. Evo Morales comes to power 2005. You can see no economic growth before him. Then the economy quadruples under him, 400% growth. I think this 400%, maybe my math is off. But anyway, from 10 to 40 trillion, a billion. What is this, trillion or billion? I don't care. Anyway, this happened, right? This is under socialist leaders. Now, very clear, socialism didn't cause this, right? Socialism is not some growth machine. It doesn't try to do that. I'm not going to claim that. There's nothing particular socialism does that cause this. But it didn't ruin it either, right? So I'm not saying socialism causes growth. I'm saying that you can have growth despite socialism. Yeah. So it works very clearly. These are not fringe examples, right? It works perfectly in very developed nations, but it also works very good in underdeveloped nations, like Bolivia or Ecuador, for example. So you shouldn't be scared of it because of one bad example, although there is a bad example, and we shouldn't deny that. We should be fair. So now let's end on some criticism. How sociology sees corruption. I can do that, but that's for another time when I teach about sociology, Miss Astrid. Criticism and defense. Some defense, because I am biased. Criticism. What's very common criticisms of socialism? One of them is from the fascist point of view, is simply that you take an objective to the whole social orientation, right? You say, well, you shouldn't help people. We need survival of the fittest. We need to improve the race, right? And if you're going to keep the weak alive, then we're not advancing, right? It's helping the weak. It's disgusting. And it's giving entitlements to poor people. Ugh. That is true. That is what socialism is doing. In Christianity, we would call that doing good, though. So you don't need to share the disgust at it. And it's also not true that it's just helping the weak. It's helping the majority is a more precise formulation, which often, like in the case of Argentina, is the middle class, right? Or in the case of Uruguay. The majority is not poor. This is about helping the middle and the working class, not just poor people. It's the middle and lower class ideology. It's not upper class, but it's not lower class exclusively. It's not communism. It's not the dictatorship of the proletariat. Although you have to keep in mind that indeed you do need solidarity, right? This critique does land in the sense that Well, you need to make people believe that they're on the same team, right? You need a lot of national solidarity. If you undermine that, if you come with, for example, federalist rhetoric, it's a good way of undermining solidarity. So people are not going to help each other anymore. And then the whole system starts to dysfunction. Another critique is that the welfare state is a very expensive program. This critique is entirely true. It is very expensive. And those costs go up over time because more people will join it because they know it works. So they're going to want part of it too. And as this typically gets more expensive over time, and thus you do need money. You do need taxes. You probably will need to raise taxes to fund this. We didn't do that in Mexico, which will make real socialists very nervous about how this is somehow going to work out. AMLO makes it work, but that only works because of how corrupt Mexico was in the past. There's so much money that was not being used that if you just don't steal it, you suddenly have more money. But under normal circumstances, you would need to get more money in, right? And again, if you're socialist, this is not negative. This is justice. This is good. It's good that rich people give part of the money back to society, right? But you could also see it as a critique, and that's a valid critique. It is expensive. It's not a free thing. But it's not all or nothing either, right? This is not just something only rich countries can do, as I just proven to you. You do what you can. If your country doesn't have a lot of money, well, then it's going to do less of each. It's going to have pensions, but low pensions, right? So it does work in all situations. It obviously works better in rich countries, but that goes for any ideology, right? So it's not all or nothing here. It does work in poor countries, just less good, like everything else works less good. But it is expensive, and that's true. And you cannot wish that away. And when people do it, it makes you nervous. Third critique, you probably have most in your head, is the idea that this will lead to abuse, right? These people, they're gonna take advantage of the system. And two things to that. Let's say you're right, but you're not really, but let's say you're right. This is a technical problem. I work on this, right? One of the things I do professionally is design welfare state policies in Leon. So if you do this, if you try to make a system like this, for example, I trying to make unemployment insurance, you have to take this into account, right? You have to take into account how people could cheat the system, and you have to prevent that in the design of the system. This is a technical problem, not a principle problem. How much you can cheat depends on how cheatable the system is, right? Just like a software program is hackable depending on how you make it, a social policy is abusable depending on how exactly you do it. And if we have time left, I can give you many examples of this. But if you supervise something well, you manage something well, you can greatly reduce this risk. In cases where there's a lot of abuse, it's probably because the system sucks in the first place. Also, this is usually vastly overestimated. Governments don't actually lose that much money on poor people cheating on stuff. It's less than you think, and it's less than a single big company cheating on their taxes, right? It's not any more corrupt than the rest of the economy. So what is cheating? Cheating is something like, let's say you get money to be a single parent, but you actually have a boyfriend, and you don't tell them you live with your boyfriend, right? So now you get, I don't know, 400 pesos more. Okay, big deal in the big picture, right? This is nothing compared to Cemex not paying taxes. But you want to try to avoid that. Okay. And lastly, the biggest critique, the one that hurts the most, is from the left. It's from the communist side, from the Marxist side. The Marxists will say, look, this all sounds nice, but you're not actually solving the problem, right? You stay in capitalism, but you don't resolve class tensions. People are still being exploited. They're less exploited, but exploited nonetheless. There's still inequality. There's less inequality. There's still poverty, right? These countries don't have zero poverty. They just have lower poverty than other countries. So you didn't actually solve the problem. You just made the problem better. You're still connected to growth, right? Because you get your income from taxes. Therefore, you can't get rid of this either. From ecological perspective, it's a bit problematic, right? You're still tied into the economy because you depend on it via taxes. And you don't resolve class warfare, right? Even if you can keep the workers happy, there's two sides to class warfare, right? It's not workers versus capital. It's capital and workers against each other. Even if the workers are happy, capital won't stop. They're going to keep trying to destroy this. They still try to overthrow the government, go against these laws, try not to pay taxes, right? They're not going to stop. They won't rest. So you haven't actually solved the problem. You didn't get rid of the capitalist class. You will be sabotaged every day, which we can see in real time. So from a Marxist point of view, this is a fake solution. All right, what you could say to this, yeah, that's true, but at least it's a step in the right direction, and maybe one day you could go from this to communism. That rarely happens, but you could. These are, I think, four of the most potent criticisms. Okay, enough of me talking. Let's get to you. Let's see what you have asked me. Javier says, I think misstep of certain parts is the corruption of the government, not the people. How can the system prevent this? How can you prevent corruption? That's a very big subject. By having exemplar leadership, by having anti-corruption things, by having some kind of internal acquisition, right? Having a lot of oversight, having things like the Unidad Inteligencia Financiera that checks people's bank accounts. By having rules that rule out corruption in the sense that there would be like a cool down time between you having a job and being able to work in that same sector. Let's say you're Minister of Finance, then you could not work for a bank for the next 10 years, right? There's a very detailed discussion. But via transparency would be the general thing. So corruption in Europe, at least, with social security is not a big thing. We in Mexico traumatized because the literally their Secretary of Social Affairs is now in prison, right, for massive corruption. All right, but I think that's more of a thing than a welfare state thing. Any other questions? Maybe I missed some. Asset estimate sociology of corruption. Again, that's a bit of a big topic. Any other questions, dear students? Skepticism, things you have to say.
How important, well, from your point of view, how important is economics for politics?
That's a very general question. I mean, I could just answer it by very, but what do you want to know in specific?
Well, do you think politics would still work if they don't take into account the economic field?
No, but I don't know an ideology that doesn't. So it's again, it's an ideological construct. Economics and the left not. There's also socialist economics, right? It's more demand driven. Yes. So the right-wing economics is more supply driven, which means that you want the rich to have a lot of money and then they're going to spend it and invest, while leftist economics is more about making sure that the people have a lot of money so they can generate demand, and that will boost the economy. So both have theories on how the economy will be successful. So I don't think that any ideology cares more or less about the economy. They just have different priorities within it. But to throw a wrench in that, we will talk soon about ecology. And from an ecological perspective, that whole logic is very right. You would have to start to think about politics that cares less about the economy. So that's a challenge to all these ideologies. Diego asked me to talk about Sembrado Vida. Yes, I'm over my time, so let me take attendance, but I'm going to keep talking. if you want to. Sembrado Vida is a perfect example of a socialist policy that's outside the welfare state. It's innovative. We invented it in Mexico. What's Sembrado Vida? Sembrado Vida is a massive tree planting program that's there to support poor farmers. The idea of Sembrado Vida is that it wants farmers, subsistence farmers, independent farmers, to change their crops towards more cash crops, things that yield more money, preferably fruit trees, right? So it's a massive program that it does two things. The government grows trees, the army does in particular, and it gives them to these farmers, and it pays those farmers to plant them, pays them a wage, pays them 5,000 pesos per month, and I think right now 420,000 farmers receive that income, right? So 420,000 farmers receive 5,000 pesos a month to change or to expand their activities into growing trees. This is already planted about 180 million trees and is budgeted to plant around 700. Well, we'll see how it goes. So anywhere between 700 million and 8 billion trees at the top end. 700 million trees, right? Why is this a very interesting program? I don't know how much you know about growing fruit. My father grows fruit trees. That's what our family literally does. So I know it a bit. If you plant a fruit tree, it takes about 4 years. Let's say I'm taking apples as the most simple example. In the case of apples, it takes about 4 years until you have fruit, right? At least commercially viable fruit. Poor farmer, you cannot spend your year planting trees and then having to wait 4 years before you get money from that. Your family will die of hunger if you do that, right? So how do you get this done? Because you do want it, because fruit is more valuable than other things you might want to grow. So you want it because you would move out of poverty if you could have fruit trees, because they're cash crops, right? If you grow avocados, for example. So you need to bridge this gap, right? The only way that can happen is if you want poor people to do it, right? Not multinationals, is that you have to support them for that time. You have to pay them to do so. So that's what this program does, right? It does exactly what it needs to do. It gives them the trees, because that's again very hard to grow these things. Gives them the trees, pays them to plant it. So then in 4 years, these people will be independent entrepreneurs, will be independent farmers that will have something that's actually worth money, right? Like coffee or like oranges or whatever it is that you're growing. So that's very smart in its design, right? And it's different from communism. You're not trying to own, like you're not having tree plantations of the government, have people work there. You want to empower farmers to become that. But you know that you can only do it if you help them. And at the same time, you're going to grow millions of trees. So that's, I think, an example of these principles all apply to one thing, where it kind of all comes together, right? That we are doing, that's original to Mexico. Does social democracy could be possible in a country organized crime issues? Yes, it's possible. Brazil did it. Brazil has the same problems as we do. Can it help to combat organized crime? Yes, in the long term. Organized crime is a bad idea. If you're a young man, it's not a good idea to join a cartel, because you'll probably die within the next 4 years. The reason you would do this, and most people know that's how it works, is because you need money, right? You have no other job and you're going to do this because, well, that's your best option. So if you would be able to work somewhere else, you would probably take that path, right? If you are a farmer that is growing right now poppy, opium poppy, to make heroin in Guerrero, well, it would be nice if you could switch to become an orange farmer via Sembrado Vida, right? And then you would have less drug production. So yeah, it could help combat organized crime if organized crime means drug trafficking, yes. It's not going to help you against kidnappings or things like that, right? So long term, it could have that effect, yeah. Could. But that's an indirect effect. I'm not promising that. Other questions? You can start leaving if you want to. You want to say this is nonsense? No. Okay, then, dear students, you can go. And next time we're going to talk about the opposite of all of this. None of this social nonsense. We're going to talk about liberalism, right? About neoliberalism. Okay?
Thank you, teacher. Have a
Yes.
nice
Have a nice day. I hope you found this interesting. Goodbye.
Goodbye, teacher.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye, miss.